There are many beautiful and inspiring sights along the North Shore between Duluth and Canada, but there's one unique spot that's even more compelling for a variety of reasons. Sugarloaf Cove is about an hour and 20 minutes from Duluth. It's very near the town of Schroeder. The story of Sugarloaf began long before the point was named possibly for the fact that it looked a lot like the loaf of sugar once sold in frontier stores. The fascinating geological forces that created Sugarloaf are best explained by John Green, who's done extensive studies there.
Consolidated Paper Company found itself with a problem. They had tremendous resources of forest wood up here on the Minnesota side of Lake Superior, but their paper mill was down in north central Wisconsin, way across the lake. So they looked around for sheltered places on the North Shore where they could dump in the logs, assemble them in great rafts, and tow them across the lake to Ashland, Wisconsin. But we know that Minnesota's Lake Superior shore is rather straight and forbidding. They did find this nice cove right here at Sugarloaf, and we might ask, how come there's this nice cove and sheltered place at this particular spot? Well, we don't know all the answers, but we can say that there was a sheltered place here as a result of three major events that happened in the geological history of this area. Now, the first event was the formation of the bedrock in the whole North Shore area of Minnesota. These rocks were formed about 1.1 billion years ago when the whole central part of what was then North America started to split apart, and huge volumes of molten rock from beneath the Earth's crust welled out over the surface to form hundreds of great big lava flows, basaltic lava flows. The surface subsided like this, so that it gave a tilt to the rock layers on the Minnesota side as well as on the other side. And we can see the tilt in the lava flows up here that form the shore right up behind us and also over here on the point. Now, the next major event came with the Great Ice Age. And in this started about 1 million years ago. Big continental glaciers formed, ground down out of Canada, covered the area, and went on down to the south. These glaciers found that the sedimentary deposits that had been deposited in the sinking basin after volcanism were much easier to erode than the volcanic rocks. And so the glaciers scooped out, dug out a lot of that sedimentary material, carried it on down to the south, to the Twin Cities, and even beyond. And this brings us to the third and last major process that formed our Sugarloaf Cove as we see it today. As the lake level drained to the present level, which occurred something like 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, the point here, made of resistant lava flows, appeared as an island. And the waves ate away at the glacial deposits that covered the area and redeposited them to form this nice beach in this sheltered area behind this rocky island. So the wave action forming the beach connected the island to the mainland. Now we can see on old aerial photographs suggestions that there was probably a boggy area in behind the beach at that time. Well, this is what the Consolidated Paper Company found when they were looking for a sheltered area that is large enough to set up a log rafting operation.
Retired company official Robert Hagman of Duluth became very familiar with Sugarloaf and consolidated its operations during his many years of employment.
He acquired Sugarloaf Landing in '43, and that was to take the place of the heavy logging over in this country, and it did for 30 years. Our first raft out of Sugarloaf Landing was in 1945, and we kept going there until 1971. Our last raft went out.
Before Consolidated began operations at Sugarloaf, logging along the North Shore for lumber was done sporadically and on a small scale as the 1800s came to a close. John Schroeder, for whom the village was named, was among the first, as was W.C. Smith, the man on the far left, who set up a camp and hired lumberjacks. Their only means of getting the logs to market was via Lake Superior, and stacks of saw timber were piled near the beach. This old photo is believed to have been taken at Sugarloaf. On a scale much smaller than would follow in later years, log rafts were assembled at Sugarloaf for towing to a mill. Much of what had not been cut by loggers along the North Shore went up in smoke in the big fire of 1926. Fortunately, the white pine was not what Consolidated Paper would be needing.
The idea that the whole world was covered with white pine of mature size and standing like hair on a dog is a big fat fable, because the predominant species on this thing is the aspen birch type, which is a rather short-lived species normally. Early fires probably brought it about, but most of the trees on this, even the aspen, was 100 years old. There being no railroad up there, they couldn't market it. We, having rafting facilities, were in the market for just the sort of stuff that they had.
There were various places Consolidated had considered as a rafting site, among them a spot near the mouth of Two Island River. So why did they choose Sugarloaf?
It was available, and it was a reasonably well protected harbor if you watched your wind carefully. Wide open to a northeaster, which is our worst kind. That's why I said we didn't like to get started before mid-June. Well, the trees were felled by handsaw up until the 50s. It was about the mid-50s that the best chainsaw man in camp overtook the best handsaw man. And then it was skidded. In those days, it was either horse skidded or tractor skidded. Small crawler tractors towing a little sled, one might say, manually put stick by stick of pulpwood, rolled the big ones, onto this sled, and skidded it to a truck, to a landing available to trucks, where in about 1 cord to 1.5 cord lots in a skid. They could skid up to about 1/4 mile.
The appearance of the so-called knuckle boom loaders, developed largely by the Ramey brothers of Two Harbors in the late 50s and early 1960s, greatly sped up the loading at the landing sites and the unloading at Sugarloaf. In the early years, as seen in this historic film taken by Dick Crawford, consolidated logging sites were 12 to 20 miles inland, fairly short trips for the truckers down to Sugarloaf. Winter traffic was light, and the flatbeds could make a fast turnaround. But in the final years of operation, some of the landings were as far as 50 miles inland from Sugarloaf. Some of the men became highly skilled with the hydraulic mechanical arm. They demonstrated great precision in picking up just the right number of pieces and in placing them neatly on the long rows of logs. On cold and windy days, not the most pleasant job in the logging business. The activity at Sugarloaf Landing was vigorous, but the piles of logs were moved to the water from mid-June to early August.
So, in the summertime, our fleet of trucks was converted to dumps. We had 3 crawler cranes of good size, 3/4 yard, that loaded trucks, and they dumped into the bay at Sugarloaf, down a big chute.
The crewmen on the company tug enclosed virtually the entire cove in a floating boom to capture and hold the pulp logs, all the while hoping there would be no violent summer storms with high winds.
On the open side of the bay, there was a double strand of holding booms. They were the best booms we had available locally. Then every 4th day, after we had about 3,000 cords of wood in the water, the tugs would appear and make the tow to Ashland, which they could accomplish in about 48 hours normally. Get them resupplied and organized, and then they tow their booms back at the rate of about 4 miles an hour. So it took 3 days for the round trip. And in the meantime, we could have another raft watered, weather permitting. So they went over to Ashland, where they were hoisted on railroad cars, shipped another 200 miles to Consolidated's Central Wisconsin paper mills.
For the next 14 years after rafting ended, there was virtually no human activity at Sugarloaf, though this Merganser pair apparently claims this as their domain. In 1985, Consolidated Paper donated the 61-acre site to the Nature Conservancy, which, in turn, sold the property to the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. 2 years later, in the fall of 1987, Dr. John Green nominated Sugarloaf Landing for designation as a scientific and natural area. In 1992, DNR Commissioner Rod Sando formally declared as such a status for 3½ acres of the rocky point and part of the beach, a special place not to be disturbed by human intrusion. Today, however, there are some lingering reminders of those days of commercial use of Sugarloaf Cove. Powerful storm action smashed concrete retaining walls, and there are 2 buildings still standing on the site. So, as we reflect on Sugarloaf's 600-million-year history, combined with intense human use in the recent past, We need to look forward to protecting this unique resource, making it available to generations ahead for study and for their enjoyment.